Today's Locked On Thunder podcast. Who are the Oklahoma City Thunder's biggest threats out west? What are their expectations this year? And is there any weak spot on this roster?
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, media member, and SI Thunder beat writer Rylan Stiles. Follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at LO Thunderpod. Joining me today is Derek Parker at DParkOK. You can find him there on YouTube, find him there on Twitter, find him at SI Thunder, SI Draft as well, and everywhere else that you get basketball coverage. But Derek, this is going to be awesome to have you on as a part of our SI team. I'm a part of your team at SI Thunder and SI Draft, and we're going to have some more of our staff on the show throughout the next week to discuss Thunder basketball and kind of let you meet the staff. But Derek, this is you and Nick Crane's baby here, SI Thunder, and so we're excited to be a part of it here at Locked On Thunder and bring you all the coverage for our first full season together. We kind of hopped in at the All-Star break last year together, but first full season. How exciting is this upcoming season for you, Derek?
Oh, I'm completely stoked. SI Thunder, we started really with the rebuild of the team. I believe we started in 2021. Obviously, things were very different back then. We were still giving it our all, but it was a very different team. And we've really grown along with the team, eventually adding our superstar in Rizzy Rye over here. But it's so fun. Like, I can't remember the last time I was this excited for a basketball season in general. Now, the Thunder in tandem with that are obviously like a top X team in the league. That makes it more fun. So I'm stoked. We've been without basketball for like 3 days now without the Olympics, and I'm already like getting splotchy and itchy. So I'm ready for it for sure.
I'm ready for it. It is going to feel like a very long 71 days until the NBA returns. We are hitting the worst part of the NBA calendar. There's not like a long stretch, but there is a bad stretch of the NBA calendar. It's only going to be about, call it 60 days before we really start ratcheting up news. Less than that, really, but like a good month and a half, whether it's like really just grasping at straws for NBA news. But that's where we lean on our great guests like Derek Parker to discuss the upcoming Thunder season. Subscribe to Locked On Thunder anywhere you get your podcast from, including on YouTube. Thank you so much for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Derek, you mentioned how the site started with the rebuild. The Thunder now fully out of the rebuild after a 57-win season that they went and parlayed into the best off season in the sport, getting Isaiah Hartenstein in free agency, trading for Alex Caruso. When you look at this team, what they've accomplished already, what they've added this summer, what are the expectations for this Thunder team?
Yeah, I'm usually pretty conservative with my estimations. It's bit me in the butt the last 2 seasons. I'm sure if you go look at my past recordings of Locked On Thunder, it's some egregious takes being had. But this year's different. I mean, if we thought expectations were out the window last year, they're fully evaporated this year. I really expect this Oklahoma City Thunder team to contend for the NBA title. This is, bar none, one of the most talented rosters in the league. I'd even wager they're, on paper, probably the second best team in the league, which we probably haven't said since 2012. I think obviously there's so many factors and variables that go into a real title run, injuries, chemistry, luck, whatever. But this is probably as poised as we've seen the Thunder to make a title run heading into the season.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome to see what this team can accomplish because the expectations have grown. And I think that can be a great thing because every game is going to feel so much more intense and it's going to feel more dire, so to say. But also, like, how does the team respond to that nature of how this season will feel game to game? I think that the biggest thing is keeping in perspective how difficult it is to go win a championship. And when the expectations are this high, where everybody's picking you to go win the West, everybody's picking you to go at least to the finals and lose to Boston, if nothing else, that's tough to do. And like, the thing that I don't know that everyone's ready for is that the feeling of disappointment is way more likely than the feeling you've had the last 2 years. Like, the last 2 years have just been pure elation. It's been it's just an awesome season where there's nothing to pick apart. There's nothing to question. Like, it's a fun young team that found success relatively easily because, like last year, they won 57 games, which was a massive success. But even if they just got to the top 6, like, you would have been happy with that, with what you were expecting this time last year. Now, you're expecting them to get home court advantage minimum. You're expecting them to make the Western Conference minimum. And that's very tough to do. Like, that's really tough. So I wonder how the expectations changing changes the mindset of the fan base, changes the mindset of the media, the mindset of the team. Like, and what does that look like? Because I think that it's easier in seasons like this to really get blinded and really get lost and really get caught up in the drama of it all and lose sight of what's actually happening.
Yeah, 100% agree with all that. I think there's teams in the past that, and the Thunder are obviously no stranger to this, that have done everything right. They've put together a championship roster. They've got the best players available to them. They've made all the right decisions, and they go on and they still can't get it done. To your point, it's so hard to do. 1 out of 30 teams gets to put on the ring, hoist the trophy, whatever, once a year. So that is the bar at this point, I think, with the roster that they've built. But again, it's not always going to be doable. And maybe this isn't the year. Maybe they make progress this year and get it done next year. But the expectation is probably there, like you said, at minimum Western Conference Finals. So that's going to, like you said, change the narrative around what the fans are saying, what the media are saying, what the players within the team are saying. So I think, I don't know how much all that really weighs on the regular season. I think there's another chance to really put together a good product in the regular season that's pretty carefree. But when those playoffs roll around and this team is now more seasoned, they're obviously better from a roster construction standpoint. I think things are definitely going to change.
I am very interested this season, and one of the first landmarks I think that we're going to get to this year is finding out the company line at Media Day. Like, are they going to play coy with these expectations? Are they going to embrace expectations? Are they going to set expectations at Media Day? Like, you know, the last couple of seasons, you can really duck behind, hey, 0-0, we're a young team just looking to develop, just looking to stack days. That's all we're trying to do. While that's still true, because they're still a young team, they're still going to grow. This team is much more than that. They're much more than just stacking days and being 0-0. Those are the core principles of what makes the Thunder so successful. And like those two quote unquote cliches, so to say, like those two cliches will be a staple of this team, because that's the staple of life, really, is being 0-0 and stacking good days on good days to get to a great result. But it's also not like a crutch and a hindrance to like acknowledging, hey, you've made the moves. You've done what needs to be done to put yourself in position to contend. How ready are you for that, you know, emotionally, of like, what are you saying about the expectations? Because they'll be asked what they think about being picked to win the West, being the favorite to win the West and everything else. What do they say in response to that? I think will be interesting. It doesn't truly matter, but like, we're looking for our first big landmine here. I think that this season can somewhat be boiled down to, and I'm really always the big picture guy, as you know, DP. But sometimes I think you just got to say it out loud and make it really simple. The biggest thing that this season swings on is if J-Dub and Chet are ready. Like, you don't have to overthink anything else. You know for a fact you have an MVP caliber guy in SGA. You know for a fact that this roster has the necessary role players to help you go win a championship. You know for a fact that you have the coach of the year who's been impressive since the day he took over as the bench boss of the Thunder. What you don't know is, what does 2 and 3 look like? What does option 2 and 3 look like in the postseason? And are they good enough to win a championship? It is what the Thunder are gambling on and what the Thunder are banking on with these moves that they've made. And I think it's a great gamble, because I believe that those two guys are good enough. And I believe that those two guys will develop into options 2 and 3 on a title team. It's a question of, will they develop into it this year or next year or the year after that? Because I think it'll happen. It's just a matter of when it happens. And that sounds like a ton of pressure to put on those two guys, but that's the bottom line. You're going to be as good as your stars are in a star-driven league. Those top 3 guys are your stars. This team will go as they go. The Hartenstein edition is incredible. The Caruso trade's incredible. It's going to come down to how Chet and Jada perform on the biggest stage after getting the experience of last year and learning how to adjust to what happened to them last year in the playoffs. And what I think that the Thunder have done so well as a front office is, instead of doing what most teams do, which is waiting and making sure that they prove it on the court, they're using their eyeballs and saying, no, we know these guys will get there. Like, it's not a question of if they'll get there or not. So why not let us be ready for when they do, and whether that's this year or next year, the year after, instead of them proving they're ready, but we're not ready to support them. Then we have to wait a whole nother year to go actually support them. So I think that it's a great decision to go make these moves and kind of push all in, so to say. But whether these moves end in any sort of hardware this year, I think resides on the shoulders of Chet and J-Dub.
Yeah, I fully agree with that statement. I think obviously the NBA is a star-driven league, always has been, probably always will be. The Celtics, I think, even though they were one of the deeper starting fives in the league, I think they proved it. All those guys are studs in their own right, and most of them have been stars at different points. Drew Holiday didn't get an all-star bid, but he's had one before. So I think it's a star-driven league. I think the Thunder's peak success will be driven by that as well. And more specifically, I honestly think it's going to be Chet Holmgren. He is the anchor to the defense, as we've already seen, but he's still got so much left to improve in that area. He can obviously improve on offense, as they've hinted at in the offseason here, in terms of giving him maybe more ball handling duties or just getting him the rock more in general. He is such a pivotal piece. I know not everybody's a huge fan of advanced metrics, but they love the kid. They had him for a lot of last season as a top 15 player in the NBA. I think if he makes jumps, you really could get me to that point where I believe he's a top 15 player in the NBA in terms of overall impact. And if he took jumps on both ends of the court, that would do wonders for an already good Oklahoma City Thunder team. And again, to add to the playoff experience that they've already had, they've already done that in the last season. So it hinges on those two guys for sure. I think Dub being Dub again would be phenomenal. He can still take leaps as well. So I think you're right. It's a star-driven league, and the Thunder are going to need their stars to take more leaps to really get to that point.
So we've mentioned already that, like, the expectations have changed and the pathway to success has changed. Like the J-Dub's rookie season, them being 2 games under 500 felt like it was parade worthy. Last season, of course, rattling off 57 wins when you expected, hey, the goal is to get within the top 6. And if you make the top 10, that's still good enough. That's no longer what the case is this year. So in your opinion, what is that cutoff of, like, okay, this is no longer disappointing. This is a good season for Oklahoma City?
I think Western Conference Finals appearance would be great for this team. I think that's a deep run. I also think them losing to absolutely anyone in the Western Conference Finals would probably be a little bit of a disappointment, depending on how the season shakes out, barring injury. Like, if you stack up the Thunder against any other team in the West right now and say both teams are fully healthy, Thunder fans and probably a lot of general media and people nationwide are taking the Thunder. So to say that it's disappointing to not make the finals feels crazy, but it also feels just a little bit true. I think they really have positioned themselves as the best team in the West. Obviously, things happen. Injuries could happen. They might run into a bad matchup. I still don't know if the Wolves are a necessarily great matchup for them. But Western Conference Finals, at least for now, would be a win, I think, organizationally. Might not feel that way depending on how things shake out.
Yeah, certainly will be interesting to see how things shake out with this team. I think that there is a pathway to be just disappointed, but not think of it as a failure if they lose in the second round in a very competitive series. I think that most people consider that a failure. It would depend how it looked. It would depend how it happened. But I think making the Western Conference Finals, it would no longer be a failure at all. And you'd of course have that hint of disappointment of, like, dang, they were so close. And, like, I think that no matter what happens, this team, whenever their ride ends, if it doesn't, if they don't win a Larry O'Brien trophy, whenever this ride ends for them, it will be just like you saw last year, where it's like a 6-7 game series with a 0-point differential, and one or two things happen. You're like, man, if they just got those one or two things back, and one or two things went differently, they would have won the series. So, it's tough, but I think that ultimately expectations will be Western Conference Finals or bust. And, like, that's how this team will be graded. And that's how this whole regular season will go. I mean, if you go back and look at Reddit, Twitter, whatever, and you find a way to go back to just a random Celtics loss in a season in which they were wire to wire the very best team in the association, every loss, those fans were panicking after every loss. Like, they're shooting too many threes. They're not cut out to win it all. Like, the Jays can't work together after every loss. And they dominated the playoffs. with ease. Every round they dominated the playoffs. And I just think that like that's the type of pressure cooker you're walking into this year, and something you have to get comfortable with, because that's going to be the type of pressure put on this team for the next half decade plus. And this is the kind of pressure you want. Like, you want your team to be in this spot right here. And so I'm very interested to see how they shift handling the fact of like zero expectations of like whatever you did was just gravy to now you've got to be one of the final 4 teams left standing to get a passing grade. And that's just a passing grade. That's not like they're all parading the street overwhelmed with joy like the past few seasons have been. That's just a, okay, good season. Good season. That's a dramatic change, Derek.
I agree. I think, and it's something, honestly, that we think about the young guys when we say that, of like the shift in pressure. We think about Chet and Dub, but that's not really something that Shai's had to deal with either. He hasn't had a ton of expectations, especially in terms of like a full body of work yet. Like, he has been right along for the ride the entire time. That CP3 season, there was no expectations. Obviously 2021, 2022, very little. And then even last year, they blew him out of the water. There's just not a ton of pressure. The team was having fun. He's going to have to handle that too. And like you said, it's going to be nice to get that this year. It's going to be interesting to see how the vibes shift. Like, do they lean into it? Do they lean away from it, as they have a little bit in the past couple seasons? It's going to be really interesting. It's something they need, though. Like you said, that is going to come every year, especially if they continue to get deeper and deeper in the playoffs. If they eventually make the finals, if they contend for the finals, they're going to need that, because you're so under the microscope. And that's especially going to be them this year, 100%.
Derek, this is awesome. Coming up, let's talk about the biggest threats to Oklahoma City out west. But first, DP, let's talk about our good friends over at eBay Motors, because they know that passion, drive, patience, that's the winning formula for championships. It's also the winning formula for keeping your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. With superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts to choose from, it's your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for with eBay's Guaranteed Fit. It's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you'll be burning rubber, not cash. With all of the parts that you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home the huge win whenever you go there. Keep your ride or die alive at eBay Motors. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available for U.S. customers. We're back on Locked On Thunder, talking to Derek Parker at DParkOK on Twitter, DParkOK on YouTube, with all of his amazing, incredible, sensational, and phenomenal draft coverage. You can find him at SI Thunder, SI Draft as well. Sports Illustrated's Derek Parker. Derek, who are the biggest threats to the Oklahoma City Thunder this year out west?
Yeah, so you asked me this question pre-pod. I just went and made a list of the teams I think are contenders. And you said out west, correct? I'll just go down the list here. I think at the top are the Wolves. We talked about it earlier. They didn't have a...
That's your 1-1 biggest threat?
Yeah, probably so. Minnesota Timberwolves. I think just in terms of roster construction, they've done a nice job. I think Ant has the ability, much to Clemente Almanza's dismay, to take another leap. I think he's really good. I think he's going to be able to be MVP.
He was riling up Wolves fans today, by the way. I mean, this guy cannot get enough of just rattling the cages of Minnesota. There are a few things in this world greater than the Almanza ability to troll. I mean, he's got Dallas people still mad at him. He's got Minnesota people just enraged by him.
The Clippers. I mean, he has the Clippers in an absolute headlock.
The Clippers fans, the just only thing that unifies that Clippers fan base, with all the turmoil of Paul George and of how they handled Kawhi and Paul George, the unifying mark for the LA Clippers is their hatred of one Clemente Almanza.
Yeah. And
it's
honestly, I get it. But Anyway, I do think the Wolves are probably number one contender out west, and honestly, to the dismay of you and your Dallas Mavericks too. We won't touch on that right now, but I think the Timberwolves, from a roster construction standpoint, are really good. I know they've really only got one more year of this core left in them, but I think they're going to give it their all. I think they have a chance to really contend for the finals this year if things swing their way. And then I've got two more Western Conference teams here. I included the Mavericks. In my heart and soul, I really don't believe it, but I could not, in good faith, come on Locked On Thunder and trash the Mavericks. So I've included them.
The Mavericks are a good place to talk here, and we'll circle back to Minnesota.
Okay.
But the Mavericks, I think that there's two schools of thought, and it sounds like we're on the opposite schools. we're in different universities here. So give me what your heart believes. Like, in your deepest heart, what do you make of this Mavs offseason? Because I think that, again, there are two different ways of looking at this Mavs offseason, and on paper right now, both of them are correct.
Yeah, so I think primarily, again, star-driven league. I think Kyrie's getting older. I don't love that. I think Luka is phenomenal, but he also played a lot of basketball, and he's not necessarily a guy who is known for coming into the season with a strong start. I don't know if going right from making the finals into another finals-bound season is really in the cards for him. I really don't. And then I don't know if they added enough around the edges to really, really move the needle for me. Like Oklahoma City, obviously needle-moving moves this offseason, and that was a 6-game series. So I just don't know if the Mavericks did enough in my mind. I think there's a chance with Luka. There's always going to be a chance. He's that good, 100%, point blank. But in my heart of hearts, they just didn't do enough. I guess there could be internal development. I don't believe in it enough, so I don't know. That's my Maverick spiel.
Yeah, I mean, listen, like I said at the front, everything that you think of the Mavs right now can be argued in an intelligent way to be true. And like, we have to see how it unfolds on the court. If you're a detractor of Derek Lively, you would say he's kind of tapped out already, not because of anything Derek Lively does, but like, where are you going to find the opportunity to let him do more? And you can't get any better than the spoon-fed baskets that Luka and Kyrie provide. Whereas like with Chet Holmgren, for example, not only can he individually do more, not only do you have opportunity to get him the ball more and get him opportunities more by himself, but your guards like really have to step up. Like your ball handler, Shea and Jada specifically, they have to get better at setting him up and setting him up for easy buckets. And that will allow him to take an uptick in production. So I think that Lively can get better as a player, but the pathway to that isn't as easy as it is for Jada. Because for Chet, because one of the pathways for Chet is just these other two guys getting better at getting him the ball and like getting him the ball earlier in the pick and roll and trusting him in the pick and roll. Whereas Lively's kind of already maxed that part out. But nonetheless, like internal development, that's like the only guy that I think could take a step forward is Lively. You saw him hit his first NBA 3 in the finals. Like that could be something. I doubt it, but it could. Where I fall with it with Dallas is like, I know that there was parts of last season where Klay Thompson couldn't play dead in the Western, but he certainly would be better than Tim Hardaway Jr. Like he certainly is an upgrade over THJ. And I think Quentin Grimes is like an addition that gets really undersold in all of this, like really undersold. So I think that's big. And then it comes down to what you believe in Najee Marshall. Me personally, I look at it and say him and DJJ practically a wash, like practically a wash. And DJJ wasn't DJJ until he played with Luka. And like the same way that quarterbacks elevate receivers, I think Luka elevates NBA players and like he makes them better. And I think that you'll see a bump in production from Najee Marshall just by playing alongside Luka Doncic and being put in better spots with Luka. So I get a Najee Marshall detraction though, because you can also point to some things and say, Luka ain't fixing that. But the belief in Luka and the belief in Kyrie at the top in a star-driven league is kind of where I still put the Mavericks in the upper echelon of the West, as it seems to you. But I'm a little bit more sold. Again, I could see your side of it panning out too. I wouldn't even have them number 2 though, and I would have them in the top 5 in the West, but I would not have them number 2.
Yeah, I mean, I can get to where you're at as well. Again, I think Luka alone, gives them a chance at being top of the West, if not 1 or 2 in the West, 100%. But I just don't know if they move the needle enough. I think obviously if like the needle was trending towards the Mavericks this year in the series they won over the Thunder, it probably moved towards the Thunder with the offseason additions. And again, in addition, I don't think you can discount the fresh legs. That's a long, long season. How often do these teams really make it back to back unless they are supremely, supremely talented like the Golden State Warriors or the Heat back in the day? I don't think the Mavericks are quite that right now. So I think they're a perennial contender for the next several years as long as you have Luka Doncic. But next year, I don't know. I'm not feeling them as much.
Yeah. What scares me about Dallas is you go through a season in which you were poorly constructed pre-deadline. You patchworked it together post-deadline, and you were awesome post-trade deadline. Like, this team was spectacular post-deadline. And you waltz into the playoffs as a 5 seed, and you make the NBA Finals. I think you get Kidd, you get Kyrie, you get Luka, and that leadership's at the top. I don't trust them to take the regular season seriously enough. I think that with every single bump and bruise, like, those guys aren't going to play. They'll wave the white flag early. And I think that the biggest deciding factor in these Western Conference playoffs will be matchups. And it worked out to their favor. They got the 5th seed last year. They played the Clippers, who were banged up and hurt. They beat them. They beat the Thunder. They beat the Timberwolves, and they got to the finals. But rolling that dice every year, like you mentioned, is not going to be easy in the West. And like, it only takes a couple of more losses to bump you down from 5 to get you into a really poor matchup earlier in the playoffs. And I wonder how they're going to care about the regular season, and I wonder how they're going to perform post that. But yeah, I would not have the Mavericks at 2 on my biggest threat list, but I would have them top 5.
Yeah, and then I've got one more Western Conference team here. This one's a doozy. I'm sure there's going to be a ton of disagreement here, but I have the Suns on this list. To your point, I don't think they're going to be like, they wouldn't be at number 1 or number 2 in the West in terms of contenders against the Thunder, but I really see the Suns this year as a threat in general. I think they have a top 5-ish player in the league. I think Devin Booker's a phenomenal co-star. I think they've got some of the chemistry that was a lot of the issue last year out of the way. I think Bradley Beal's going to be a decent complementary piece. And then honestly, they added around the fringes this offseason pretty well. I think Tyus Jones was a phenomenal add, especially for this team and the roster they've put together. Rookies, they didn't do a ton at the draft. I don't know how much they're really going to help, but I just like the Suns. I think they have a lot of potential, and I'm kind of willing to bet on them for at least the upcoming season.
I am like shocked by the Suns addition only because why no Memphis Grizzlies here? Like, what's your temperature check on Memphis Grizzlies? Because if that was your whole list of the West, there's no Memphis, there's no Denver. Like, where are you at with Memphis? Because I'm all in on Memphis. And I think that, like, Memphis, one, is just in general going to be a good team, but specifically for how they can guard the Thunder, I think they'll be a very tough test.
I think Memphis is a good team. I think they could have a really good season. I think people really discount how hard it's going to be, even with the additions that they have and the losses they had last year. I think people really discount how hard it is to go from bad to immediately good. Like, there's been a lot of turnover since they were good in the West. So I just don't know, even with the additions of Ja, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., Marcus Smart, like all these players, and then rookies, Gigi Jackson's now good. Like, it's just really tough to go from 20 wins a year to an immediate 50. Like, even the Thunder didn't do that. You know, we saw the 40, whatever it was, 40 and then 57. Like, it's just tough to do that. I don't quite have Memphis as like a true contender. I think they're going to be a good Western team. But in terms of, like, if the Thunder got Memphis in a playoff matchup, hope this clip doesn't come back to bite me, I wouldn't be too worried about it, truly.
Really?
Yeah. And obviously we're like more than a year out from that. So
for sure. I'm kind of in on Memphis just because I think that the Thunder would still win. And if you told me right now that was the playoff matchup, I'd still pick the Thunder. So I don't want to act like, like anyone's shaking in their boots over a playoff series. But like, whenever you're listing out teams that match up really well with the Thunder, who have done a lot to counteract matchups, and maybe the Thunder have fixed this problem, but like, you look at last year with the Lakers and how they defended the Thunder, it was packing the paint in and spraying out to the 3-point line and using your height, using your length to disrupt drivers and disrupt mid-range shooters. Memphis is set up to be able to do that with Jaren Jackson Jr., with Zach Edey at the rim waiting on you, with Desmond Bane, who I love. Like, they're set up to do that and replicate that with Ja Morant, who is used to playing with a heavy-legged center. You know, in Edey, you can compare him to a little bit to how they used Steven Adams. I'm very cautious of the Memphis Grizzlies. It's interesting that you are not on that side, because me and Joel Lorenzi, we're very skittish about the Beale Street boys.
I think the Grizzlies are going to be a good team, but they couldn't even quite get over the hump before. And honestly, part of me still feels like that was the more talented roster. I know there's been additions. I don't know. I'm kind of in wait and see mode with the Grizzlies. I just think it's really hard to go from 20-something wins to the 40 or 50 that people are projecting, especially in a year that Ja's going to be coming back from injury and suspension and all of that whole thing. Like, that was just a whole mess. He's going to be coming back from that, and he's going to have a lot of different players around him. There's just so many factors and variables. I don't feel confident placing bets on them right now, and that could come back to bite me, but I'm sticking with it.
So your list, give it to me one more time from the top.
This is only Western Conference. I have Thunder would be my top contender in the West, Wolves shortly after, then Mavericks, and then Suns.
And is that your complete list of teams that you would not be surprised to see make it out of the West?
Yes.
That's your complete list?
That's it. That's all of them.
So you would just be stunned. You would be stupefied.
I don't know.
Be just flabbergasted if the Denver Nuggets, with the best player in the sport, made it out of the West.
I don't love their offseason at all. They do have the best player in the sport, and I don't even think that's a question in my mind right now after the Olympics. He's phenomenal. I don't know if they have the juice. This is all based on vibes right now.
Spoiler alert. Of all the players in the NBA, they have the least all juice team members. I didn't know that. I could have felt that with my inner being, because the vibes right now just don't feel great in Denver. I don't know why. It obviously has nothing to do with, like, there's no actual reports of anything in the locker room. Don't want to say that, but my personal vibes about Denver aren't good. I don't know why. The Jamal Murray in the Olympics thing, stuff like that's easy to carry over. I don't feel good about Denver, and that's not to say that. You were a little bit dramatic there. I wouldn't be stupefied if they made the finals, but I just don't like their odds in comparison to the rest of the teams. I don't know if that's a team that's really built to withstand multiple blows from the Thunder, the Mavericks, the Grizzlies, the Timberwolves. Like, if they ran into two or more of these teams and then have to face a really good Eastern Conference team, I just don't know if I see it right now. I really think that, again, same point as Luka, they have a chance with Jokic alone. I think moves need to be made a little bit on Denver's end, though. So that's interesting. There's the Jamal Murray thing. Like, he was awful for Team Canada.
Yeah,
he was an embarrassment, frankly, in that Olympics without knowing any of the details of, like, if he was hurt or not or whatever. His performance was not good enough, and not even close to good enough. And
not good in the playoffs either. Like,
not except for when he played the Lakers.
Right.
It was just not good enough. What's that about? Like we got to get to the bottom line of that too. So, like, I'm not saying that the Nuggets are anywhere near the top of my list, but I'd have them above the Suns personally. Like,
that's fair. I understand.
I'm
that's
not in on the Suns. I love the Tyus Jones pickup, but I'm not in on the Suns at all. And
I get it.
I think that my list is somewhat comparable to yours, but there are some key differences. Like, I have the Thunder 1-1. If I had to bet, I would bet the Thunder would win the West. But my number 2 team would be Minnesota as well. Shout out to Clemente Almanza. Again, the most hated man in many cities in the NBA. Which is he going
for all 29 or maybe even all 30? Like, Thunder fans could very quickly turn on him. We don't know.
Well, we'll see. I don't know if that can happen. But
sources, the media is starting to turn on him.
Well, the media has always been trying to push things, but goodness. Clemente Almanza's a great guy. Hopefully going to be on the show soon. But whenever you look at this West, Thunder
And
won.
I do want to get this out here. There's gaps between these. I'm not saying the Suns are like a hard number 3 here. I think it's Thunder. I think there's probably a sizable gap, and then I would package together Wolves and Mavericks. And then after that, there's probably a sizable gap again, and then it would be probably Suns Nuggets. But
so I would go Thunder. And is it a hot take to say that I almost view the Thunder's gap with the rest of the West the same way I view the Celtics gap with the rest of the East? Like, would it just floor me if the Celtics didn't win the East again and somehow the Sixers put it all together, or Giannis and Dame took over in this season? It wouldn't just stun me, but like, I really think that we're just on the collision course for OKC to Boston. And I know that specifically is not a hot take, but the separation, I think, is viewed differently in the East than it is in the West. And I just think that the Thunder are flat out the best team. They were the best team last year. They're the best team this year. They're the best constructed team. If you believe in the step from J-Dub and Chet, they then have the best star talent in the league because they have 3 guys. The rest of these teams we're talking about have 2 or sometimes 1.5. So, like, I just think that there's a bigger gap than we want to give it credit for with OKC just because we haven't seen them do it yet. But no one's done it until they've done it, Derek. Like, nobody's done anything in life until you've went and done it. And that includes never mind. But
yeah, to my earlier point, on paper, if you just go down the list, I think the Thunder are the second most talented team in basketball. I really believe that. I think they have an MVP candidate in Shea. They have a guy that could potentially get to MVP type impact. Obviously, Chet's probably never going to have that impact offensively, statistically, from like a I don't know what I'm trying to say, like the prettiness of like an MVP resume, but like impact wise on the basketball court in terms of locking down the defense, being able to spread the offense out and get buckets inside. Like, he could have that. J-Dub is J-Dub, as we know, probably a 20 points per game scorer, can add really good defense and can go up or down from there on either end. They've got Hartenstein, they've got Caruso, they've got Dort, they've got Casey Wallace, they've got Isaiah Joe, they've got all these pieces. I think if you just go down it, they're the second best on paper. So I see no reason why I should stray away from that take here and say that, well, maybe the Timberwolves are close. No, I really don't think so. So
yeah, I don't think so at all. But we'll talk about it coming up, wrap up this conversation and talk about any weak spots in this roster that we've almost called perfect. Very late to a break here. I apologize to the powers that be, but it's been a lot of fun talking with you, Derek Parker at DParkOK on Twitter. The Thunder, we mentioned the expectations. We've mentioned the biggest threats. I think that it's Thunder, one with a bullet. There is a good gap between the Thunder and Minnesota, who's both of our number 2 teams. I think Minnesota is paired with Dallas and Denver for the same reason for me of like, Dallas and Denver, they have 2 of the best players we've ever seen play basketball. So I would not be stunned if Luka, who wasn't healthy last year and still went to the finals, was healthy somehow, which is a huge gamble for anybody to make it through an 82-game season. It's a bigger gamble for Luka to make it through an 82-game season healthy. But if he is healthier than he was last year, because no one's 100% healthy by the end of it all, if he's healthier than he was last year, and you got another outlier series from fill in the blank of someone who steps up around Luka, they can easily go on a run again, even though it's very tough to do. And then I cannot keep doubting Jokic. Like, I think that he's the best player that you see in the sport. And maybe we are underselling and kind of overreacting to a little bit of what we've seen Denver kind of have the crack in the armor a bit over these last couple of months. So I'll put all 3 of them on their same island here. Then I'll take a couple steps backward and put Memphis, who I am in love with. And maybe I look like an idiot when this is all said and done, but I'm in love with Memphis, who I'll also have on an island together with the Phoenix Suns. Then a couple steps back from that is really nobody. Like, I couldn't see anyone but that collection of teams winning the West. So you can just decipher them how you will, and we'll do playoff projections as we get closer. But those are the teams I think could win the West, and kind of how it's broken down into tiers. But in reality, I think that it's going to be Oklahoma City, because I just look at what other teams are dealing with. You mentioned the pressure of what the Thunder are going through. The Thunder do not own all the pressure in the NBA. In fact, it's going to be heightened pressure from what they're used to dealing with. But I'd say that they still, of that list we just laid out, own less pressure than anybody on that list because Kyrie is getting older. That's an issue for Dallas. We know Phoenix is old and injury riddled and has no depth. That's an issue for Phoenix. We know that Memphis is trying to jump from 27 wins to the West, version of winning the West. That's an almost impossible jump for them to deal with. So that wipes out the bottom half here of our contender list. Then we've seen the struggles that Jamal Murray's had for Team Canada, and maybe it ends up evolving into something very difficult for them to deal with as a team if that continues. And then with Minnesota, I think that the pressure on Minnesota will either make them or break them. It'll either be something that they rally around of like, they're trying to break us up. They say we're too expensive. Let's just block out all that noise. Let's have one last ride together. Let's just be the closest team possible. Or, as we've seen before, contracts and salaries and luxury tax and these things can get into a locker room and really drive a divide between players and a divide between locker rooms. And if they combust because of that, while simultaneously Jamal Murray is not back to form, while simultaneously Luka's a little bumped and bruised and Kyrie's showing his age a bit more, while simultaneously the Suns don't have the depth to compete, then you just are looking at an easy path for the Thunder to win the West. So like the Thunder are the only team who you can say that about, who could find themselves walking their way to the finals, while the other teams will be clawing and scratching to get there. And because of that, it's why I have the Thunder all alone at the top of the West of like, this is the team to win the West. This is the team that's head and shoulders above the rest of the West, and it's Oklahoma City. Yeah,
I agree. I do want to add, and I literally just thought of this as this podcast was going, but the Warriors, I want to add the caveat. If they do actually make a trade, I think you can never count out Steph Curry and the Warriors. It's a decent roster. It's not a great roster, but if they were to offload, say, a Kuminga, a Podziemski, I think you couldn't count them out. I just want to throw that in there. But no, I agree with everything you said. I think the Thunder really have positioned themselves to be the best team in the West. Obviously, again, the variables in this are so many. Like, injuries exist. The Thunder really didn't deal with that a ton last season. Chemistry, things happen, contracts. So it's hard to say they're going to waltz to the finals, but I think they have definitively positioned themselves to be the best team in the West next season.
For sure. And now, if you include the East here, because you kept teasing that like this was just the West, what do you got on the East besides Boston?
I think obviously the Celtics are at the top. They're so good. Like I could go on and on and on and on about how great that Celtics roster was constructed. I think the Knicks are also in position. As good as the Celtics are, we haven't seen someone repeat in a long time. Again, since those teams that were like very supremely talented with multiple do-it-all guys. I think the Knicks have reached that point from a talent perspective. I think they've got a lot of good players. I think they've got an absolute stud in Jalen Brunson. And then I've also got the 76ers. I know, again, that's a hot take, but I like the Sixers this year a little bit too. I don't think you can count out a Joel Embiid-led team similar to Luka. So those are the ones I've got in the East.
I love it. Now, just real quick, the rapid fire, little explanation needed. Where do the Thunder fall if you include all 30 teams? Because to me, it's Boston, a tiny step Thunder, like a half a step even Thunder, and then there's a sizable gap.
I agree. Are you looking for number 3?
No. Do you agree with that? Being
yes.
Like they're clear. There's a gap between Boston and OKC than the rest.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Okay. We'll be back to preview more of like who's number 3 and everything. We'll have many more preview pods to do between now and the season tip-off, and little tease in the biz. We'll be seeing more of Derek Parker around this season on Locked On Thunder. So make sure you stay tuned for that as well. Derek, last thing, give me one weakness. We've been very high in the Thunder for the last 44 minutes and beyond that, but we've been very high in the Thunder. What's one weakness or to not, because weakness sounds just too strong for how good this roster is right now. One area where you're going, I wonder how they're going to do here.
I've got 2 little things in this category. I've got chemistry with the newbies. I think for as good as these ads are in Caruso and Hartenstein, obviously unbelievable talents to add in an offseason where you're not really giving much up. Ingratiating 2 big pieces like this is still going to involve some growing pains. hopefully ones that don't rear their head too long into the 2024-25 season. But if there's still issues with this come playoff time, that's something that could maybe delay the success of this team a little bit. So that's something I'll be looking for. How quickly do they figure out how to ingratiate these guys in Caruso? I think on paper, Caruso's easy. Like, he's a 3-and-D guy. He's going to go out there, give his max effort. Maybe he runs a little bit of the more backup point guardy role. Maybe that takes a little bit to envelop. And then Hartenstein's kind of its own animal. You know, this is not a plug and play type thing. This is going to be something that they're really going to have to iron out over the course of the early parts of the season, and then hopefully make it really successful for the latter parts. Then the other thing is a middling defender, someone more in between guard and center. Oklahoma City obviously has unbelievable defenders: Dort, Kaysen, Chet, Caruso, Hartenstein. But with the offensive role that I think Dub is going to have to take on this year, it feels like the team could still benefit from a small forward who's really defensive minded. I know that guys like Kaysen and Caruso have these long wingspans, they can size up, but I think it would really aid them to grab someone around the fringes who is a little bit heavier, can hang with a little bit more of the star-studded small forwards that litter this league.
Derek, thank you so much for joining us on today's show. Cannot wait for what we have cooking up here as the season draws near. But right now, in the meantime, what do you have cooking up for the fine folks to go check out whenever they want more Derek Parker content? Because we all need more DP in our life.
Yeah, to your intro, we have SI Thunder, Thunder on SI, I guess we would say now. And then NBA Draft, we've got Rockets Nets coverage, Pokes coverage over there too, so go check all of that out. And then YouTube's still doing some stuff here and there. Derek-Parker on YouTube, hitting a little bit of the 2025 draft prospects right now, which has been really fun to dive into, doing a little different format. So that's what's cooking.
Cannot wait for more Derek Parker than ever before this season on Lockdown Thunder. We finally have convinced him. We'll talk more about that in the future. But Derek, thanks for joining us. And until tomorrow, be good and be good to